those look like some clubs over there. Oh,
Yeah, no,
there's
I've
the
just moved
Gadas.
into my new place, so you can see the clubs there. I'll take you for a little tour around later on.
Nice.
Uh,
So I was just at the point of telling people a little bit more about who you are, and just kind of telling them how I first actually came across your information. It was actually years ago when I was living in Bangkok. This had to be about 2010, 11, something like that, maybe 2012
yeah,
even. I just stumbled across your videos on YouTube, and I saw all those clubs, and I was actually quite intimidated by by all of those clubs in the background. I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting stuff. But I didn't actually dwell on the clubs at the time too much. Someone who lived in Bangkok uh, was able to provide steel clubs, and so I first started, kind of testing out steel clubs, and didn't actually get my hands on any like type of Indian club or wooden club until I made it back here in the States. Um,
sure.
anyway, yeah, so my journey has been kind of long to get to this road of even having an interest in it, but I always look around at people who have been training with these tools for a long time, and kind of try to see what it is that I can gain and learn from them. And I really have to say I appreciate the amount of time and effort and energy that you put into putting all that content out there on YouTube. I think it's really amazing, and I think it's super helpful, and I think that it's inspirational and motivational. So, um,
No, thank you for
anyhow,
that. But it's
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the content, I found myself wanting to put things up on YouTube because mainly because at first it was just to check my own performance, if you like, and my own technique and form. And then it kind of got people were sort of talking to me about, well, how does this happen? How does that happen? And then I kind of sort of drifted into some of it's improvised, some of it's planned, and it just kind of rolls forward. I mean, because I just don't think there's an end to it. There's no sort of start and finish to club work. There's no start and finish to mace work either, or meals for that matter.
Hmm.
And it's just, I mean, it's fun for me to sort of put it up and then be able to talk to people about it afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I have a lot of respect for um, the amount of like historical and I guess like traditional acknowledgement that you put into um, your demonstration of use of the clubs and
Yeah.
meals and the Gada. Um, and so that's really, I think that's really important, because I think sometimes people lose sight of the origins of things, and I just think that that's really cool aspect of and what makes you you, you know.
Yeah, no, it is a worry in some ways how the origins of things do get forgotten. I mean, it's amazing, um, and I think the more I got into this whole sort of, or we'll call it the three disciplines, like Indian clubs, meals, and the Gada, the more I got into it, the more I started realizing that there's an absolute massive information that's there that basically has to be made, people have to be made aware of. There's nothing new. It doesn't belong to anybody in particular, like some people would like to do with some things, but we won't go into that stuff. But I mean, this is everybody owns this because it's just centuries old. I mean, particularly the Gada and the Persian Mils. Those two are where it all started, and I mean, there's argument as to whether, you know, the Indians were first with the Gada or the Persians were first with the Mils. To me, it doesn't really matter, because I mean they're both beautiful disciplines, and I mean it just, you know, but talking about how they originated, and you know, whatever you can sort of information you can pull together, because some of it's very hard to find. I mean, it's, you know, you get snippets in. I got one snippet which is really interesting. There was a podcast that started a while ago about Persia. Basically, the guy only did 2 episodes. And in and I forget whether it was the first or the second episode, he suddenly came across this information about, you know, how the training started with Cyrus the Great 2,500 years ago, and how he wanted to, you know, to train his men with equipment that was maybe 2 to 3 times heavier than their swords and shields. And it was just that one snippet, and I've never found any reference to anything else since then. You know, it was just sort of, you know, it was just that, literally a few sentences, and I listened to it over and over and over again just to make sure that I got it right before I started talking about it. You know,
Right.
but it's a fascinating subject to sort of look into the things in depth. That's for sure.
So, on that same note of usage and training, I've read in a few places that the smaller Indian clubs were more geared towards dagger fighting. Is this correct?
Well, okay, that's not necessarily true. I mean, I did a video about the God, I've forgotten the name of it. When you roll the club over the shoulder. God, I've just completely blanked out. It'll come back to me. And I was trying to sort of suggest ways of where that sort of maneuver would have come from, to have the change of a dagger position from, you know, like an ice pick, so you're basically bearing down onto your opponent, as opposed to stabbing your opponent, say, in the gut or wherever, and being able to switch the dagger from one position to another. That was pure speculation on my part. I mean, I haven't read that anywhere. I was just trying to sort of like figure out where the maneuver came from, and I still can't remember the name of it. It'll probably come back to me, so we'll come back to that one. So, you know, I mean, for that exercise, you need to use a club that weighs around about a pound and a half, no heavier, because I mean, I've seen people try to do it with heavier clubs. It's just basically, you can only do it for a very short space of time, because your arm is sort of straight out, and the pressure is on the top of the shoulder here. Massive. So the interesting thing is that I found a book or a manual, a military manual, in the State Museum of Melbourne here in Australia, which is called Regulation Clubs. And this manual deals with exercises that were taught to the military with the first clubs that were used or were modified in India prior to the sort of Indian club taking shape into that sort of bowling pin shape that it has, with a sort of belly or the barrel at the end. These clubs were very much like the Jori, or the which is basically, you know, like a long straight club. They reached from the grip of a soldier, that would reach, when he was gripping the club, it would come to roughly just short of his top of his shoulder.
Okay.
And they
Wow.
weighed about 4 pounds. I mean, that's a heavy club for an Indian club.
Yeah.
And so the exercises in that book are very, very straightforward, very, very simple. There's not a lot of spinning and turning and doing all that sort of stuff. And this was just very interesting, because one of the biggest problems that the military had in India at the time was that the obviously very hot climate, nasty diseases like malaria, dysentery, cholera, and so on. And yet, because of the heat, most of the military would spend, you know, very sedentary days. They would lying in their beds, basically, you know, just dealing with the heat, not moving. So consequently, you know, the army got basically more and more as if it were, you know, they weren't ready for combat. I mean, they just weren't not more prepared for it. And they'd go and drill for an hour in the morning, and then basically that was it for the rest of the day. They'd have their, you know, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and, you know, spend most of the time lying in bed boiling hot. And the medical profession in those days, I mean, you've got to consider that this is sort of 1830s, 1840s. The doctors in those days were prescribing movement, as in, you know, for malaria even, and for some of those sort of nastier diseases that you would get in India. They would describe this, prescribing movement for people get up and move, and you know, that'll help you with breathing, with everything else, and you know, just get the body going. Which, I mean, in some ways, I mean, basically the medicine was much further behind than it is now. So the treatment just wasn't available for this sort of stuff.
Right.
But, you know, it's just an interesting, so I mean, it was a very much a sort of prescribed thing to for the military to do. And, you know, consequently, the drills became more and more complex with clubs, and the clubs more modified more from the. I still think that the Indian clubs, like grandfather, if you like, is the Gada, and the Jori club, the long ones that they have in India, that they, you know, swing two clubs together.
Right.
And if you have a look at those first clubs that are in the book called regulation clubs, regulation exercises, I think, they are very, very similar in shape, but just a much more smaller, shrunken version of the big clubs. So I mean, there's a definite link there.
Wow. So
yeah,
you did mention, I wanted to touch on one aspect because I think it's like important, you know, with people, so many people entering the realm of club swinging, mace swinging, Gada swinging, and things like that. You mentioned, you know, you early on you had some elbow issues and things like that, and I've been reading up quite a bit on, in general, on kind of the biomechanics of overhead athletes and elbow and shoulder injuries. So you take, like, you know, athletes like pitchers and things like that have to wind up and throw repetitively. You know, tennis players with their overhand swinging, they tend to have similar sort of injuries. You know, I'm just wondering, you know, how you managed to, you know, make your way through that without any, you know, serious long-term, you know, issues or any of those things becoming chronic.
Well, after sort of a few years, when I first started teaching Indian clubs, I mean, I fell into the trap of thinking, well, you know, if I can do some very basic, what I considered basic moves at the time, then most people should be able to pick them up. And I was absolutely, totally wrong. And I mean, the first sort of like seminars that I did, that was just a big mistake. So I came home sort of like after that, and then decided, well, I've got to start doing basic circles. And I'm talking about, you know, like a straight arm circle with the club held out, and the club is gripped in a saber grip, so that the hand is like this and the club's coming out of here, and literally just swing the arm round and round, whether it's outward or inward. I mean, that's a very, very basic circle. And then basically the same with the back circle around the back of the shoulder. Those two circles basically combined then give you the heart-shaped swing, inward, outward, and I mean, there's a lot of variations that can be done just with those two circles. Now, for athletes who do, say, throwing or hitting sports like tennis, I mean, cricket for another one, for instance, the bowlers, you know, when they throw the ball overarm, I think that the circular motion that they would really, really help them is those simple circles with Indian clubs. And nothing heavy, like a 2-pound club or a 1 kilo, is more than enough for that exercise, just to get the shoulder girdle moving, get the joints moving in the shoulders. And even if it's done one-handed and then you change hands, so you go, let's say 20 revolutions with the right hand, 20 with the left, change over. And so you go outward first, outward on the left, then inward on the right, inward on the left. You know, I mean, that's, to warm up the shoulders. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm just going to sort of like diversify here. In Denmark, there's a group of guys who run a kind of a school for handball. No, it's not a school actually. It's almost, they run Indian club therapy for handball players. And they showed, when I went to visit them and did a couple of seminars with them, they showed me some video of handball players who had injuries, and they had a camera mounted on top of the handball net to record the player, and then the player had to throw the ball into the net as he normally would during a game. And the first videos of those guys and girls, for that matter, were, I mean, you could see the pain in their face of the sheer, the effort of their putting into the throw, and then wincing at the pain in the shoulder. Then they did a course for 6 weeks of simple Indian club movements, and re-recorded those guys again, and basically most of them walked away smiling. It was amazing. Wow. I mean, I think it's, so I mean, from a, even from sort of like all those throwing sports, baseball, all that type of stuff. I mean, it's a fantastic way of basically getting the shoulder to move. Because if you think about it, I mean, we very rarely hold our hands above our heads, basically.
Right.
So you're not in this type of position, and so for an older person, even it can become a challenge to reach up and get things off a shelf.
Right.
Simply because, I mean, because the body's kind of locking up with age. And I think that the sort of, so there's multiple uses just for those simple circles,
Yeah.
So I mean, the front circle being the most important one, the back circle is very important, because I'll try and move so that you can see what I'm talking about. So as the back circle, so the club is where my thumb is, and then it goes behind my back, turns out to the side, up to the top. And that movement, I watch the elbow. The elbow comes forward when the club is away from me there.
Yeah.
And then out, elbow moves out to the frontal plane, and it's completely open. So the movement is there.
Yeah.
And that's a really important movement, because, I mean, basically that frees up. So, I mean, you've got the movement, with the circular movement with the hand holding the club in front of the body. And then you've got the back movement, which is basically getting the shoulder girdle moving. Fantastic. I mean, recuperative stuff, amazing.
Yeah.
And those guys in Denmark are really doing some amazing work with them. Basically getting guys back to their normal good form.
That's amazing, because I think, I've seen old video of physical education, even in the United States years ago. We're using clubs in schools as a part of their regular activity, and I think it's strange how we just decided one day that these things are no longer, worth using, when they were so successful at what they're, capable of doing with the body.
Yeah, it's very interesting. One thing that I'm pretty sure about now is that, the sort of Indian clubs became really popular from about 1860 onwards, up through till about 1930. And then in the 1930s, the 1920s, 30s, the sort of organized sport became much more, it became into being. I mean, gridiron, basketball,
Right.
all those types of sports. In Europe, there were other sports like handball, cricket, and soccer, basically. So organized sports actually sort of kind of took over. And also, there was the birth of the gym, or the gym as we know it today, with the machines in it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's one very well known to me. Many people may not have seen it. There was a parody done in a magazine in the States about Indian clubs, which was sponsored by gym machine manufacturers, saying, and they used images from Kehoe's book, which was published in the 1860s,
Mm-hmm.
stating that all Indian clubs were good for was chasing away bees and flies, because you're going on this sort of thing. And I mean, basically it was a sort of, the movement towards the gym of that we know today, but the very early versions in the 1930s and 40s basically killed off the popularity of clubs. That was not just the gyms; it was also organized sports became so popular
Yeah.
that the individual lost, because the individual was going watching games rather than training themselves and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you step back into, say, the turn of the 18th to 19th century, Indian club swinging was very much an organized thing. So, for instance, people would go to, and it was once a week, basically, from what I can gather. People would go to, say, a church service on a Sunday morning, and then then there would be a social gathering afterwards, and there'd be the church hall,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd go into the church hall. Somebody would sit down at the piano, and the whole lot of them would swing clubs together to music, which would have been a waltz or something with a 4/4 beats. I mean, it was a very much an organized thing
Right.
for a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, you had the crazy guys, the endurance swingers at the same time. But I mean, basically, the general public, it was very much organized, and it was done. Everybody did it together.
That's amazing to know that sort of background on it. I mean, I've also kind of looked at the way baseball players used to take a bunch of bats and kind of put them behind their head and swing them around a little bit and kind of get the
Yeah,
shoulders moving. And I don't know the research on that or the history on that, but it looking back in retrospect, that just all kind of makes sense, that they're doing that sort of stuff, for their shoulders and for, in preparation for swinging a bat, so
sure,
um,
sure.
pretty
Okay,
cool.
just stepping back, that dagger movement that we were talking about is called snakes. I mean, I don't know why I forgot it, but
Snake,
it's snakes. I mean, you turn
right?
the cloth over in your arm. I mean, I've done a
Yeah,
few videos about them, so sorry guys. I mean, it was just had a blanked out.
yeah. So I
Anyway,
think
so
I've
yeah,
seen that video.
yeah. So I mean, there's a few videos about that, and I mean, it's a very interesting maneuver, if you like. And I'll just say now, I've also just because I get onto a movement like that, and I basically get stuck with it. So I've been working on that movement going out to the side on the frontal plane, and now I've just discovered that you can also go up above your head and down towards your hip. And also you can do a snake going forward on the sagittal plane. So I mean, there's something that I'm still
Hmm.
playing with at the moment. I mean, there'll be a video coming up with that in a while. I mean, I've done a little bit of video with it, but not a whole heap just yet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting, because yeah, as I said to you earlier on when we started, I mean, I'm always looking for something, what haven't I found yet, and I mean, that goes into, I make mistakes, and every time I make a mistake, I analyze what I've done,
Mm-hmm.
can I use that? Is it something that I can use and, you know, convert into an actual movement if I've made a mistake, or be it whether the club's gone the wrong way or whatever. I mean, there's quite a few moves that I've actually developed by analysing mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So, but that's just personal development from my point of view. I just find it very important to do.
Right. So like you've been to India, you've been to Iran.
Iran.
Um, what were those experiences like as far as, getting an opportunity
Okay.
to learn those in those places?
So as you said in the introduction, I mean, I got my first steel mace, and you know, I think it was 2008, and I had no instruction with it whatsoever. So I can remember my son used to come over and train with me in those days, and we'd literally swing, you know, 5 times left, 5 times right, and that would be the end of training, because we knew that if you did it for any longer, you'd basically mess your elbows up seriously.
Yeah.
And it took me, it maybe took me the best part of a year to figure out that the handle of the grip of the mace, we were holding it up here, and it basically had to drop down, and the elbows had to point up, so that
Right.
the mace was swinging not from the hand here, which puts too much pressure on the elbow. It has to
Exactly.
actually swing from the elbow.
Yeah.
So it swings from here, even though it's not quite a straight line with the hand holding the mace. It still has to swing from the elbow, and then there'll be no problem. Once that was sorted out, then we were off and running. And so yeah, this was a steel mace that we had. Didn't really know anything about it, where it came from or whatever. And then I found a magazine. Can't remember exactly what it was now, and it had Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh area of northern India, which is sort of, I mean, it's an hour's flight from New Delhi, you know, the sort of the capital of India. So I thought, well, okay. I mean, I was just at the end of my tour, and I booked to go to Varanasi to check it out. And as luck would have it, because in India, I mean, the guys come up to you, you know, either selling you something or wanting something, or, you know, I mean, all this sort of thing goes on all the time. And he came up to me, and he said, "What do you want to do? What do you want to do in Varanasi?" And I said, "Well, I want to see, you know, the Palavans training in Akharas." I mean, and it turned out that he was an ex wrestler that had back problems due to wrestling, and basically had to stop. And he said, "Oh, meet me at whatever it was, 6 o'clock in the morning the following day, on the back of his motorbike." And I just literally grabbed my video cameras and stuff, and off we went.
I've
And
seen
I
that
think we
video.
visited about three or four different Akharas that same morning, and it was just amazing. And at first, when I saw those guys training, I mean, I was just so humbled, because I just couldn't believe the amount of swinging that they do. You know, it's you know, they'll swing. I mean, they'll start with a sort of 10 kilo, 15, 20, 25. And I mean, and some of them are look so small, because I mean, they're not big in stature, the Indians.
Right.
And it was just like awesome to see it. And I mean, all I could do was video it, basically, because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I thought, well, you know, okay, if I video enough, I'm going to have information just for myself, so I can go home and study them and watch those videos over and over and over again to see their technique. Because at that stage, even though that I could make conversation with my translator and sort of like guide, his English was still very limited, and I asked him questions to ask the wrestlers about what they did, and it was just very difficult communication-wise. So, I mean, I couldn't really get any tips or sort of, you know, or do anything. I had a few swings there, but I mean, I was basically almost too embarrassed to do it.
Right.
because these guys were, I mean, they were just like animals, you know, I mean, like machines, you know, swinging the Gada. And then, I mean, and of course they brought out the Jori clubs, and they gave me a demonstration of those, plus the neck ring, the Nal. And I mean, I was just like, well, you know, wow, you know, just so I thought, well, okay, next time around, I'm going to go back. And I started digging to see, you know, if there were any events that were worth seeing. And I found out that they have that on the 1st of August, they celebrate the Cobra Festival in Varanasi. And the Cobra Festival basically is when all the wrestlers or the Palavans from every single Akhara train with all the heavier stuff. So during the year, they'll train with, you know, the Gada from 10 kilos up to 25. because they want to, they consider anything heavier, basically, they want to stay supple for wrestling and whatever. But for the Cobra Festival, it's basically, you know, who can do heavier type of challenge.
Right.
So the Gadas come out, and I mean, you know, you get the sort of the 30 kilo, the 40 kilo, the 50, and the 60 come out, which are ridiculous because I mean, basically, it's although it's swung, it's they put mustard oil on their backs and on the shaft of the Gada itself, and they're swung and pulled up into position.
Yeah.
And then it goes again, and it's counted for reps. I mean, basically. There's no sort of question about that. Again, with the Jori, I mean, there's a video that I have on my channel about a street competition, which I basically found out at the last minute. You know, it was like sort of quick grab the camera and get there with my driver and guide. And when we got, it was bordering on embarrassing because when I got to the street festival, when the judges saw me and I was the only Caucasian guy there, I got pulled out, sat right in front, which was amazing because I mean I could get good pictures.
Right.
But it was just like it was a bit embarrassing the way this, I mean, literally I got two guys dragged me by the hands, pulled me, sat me down right in front. You know, there's like a chair appeared from nowhere. And those guys with the Jori, it's very interesting because the guys who swing the Jori warm up with the Gadas. I mean, because, you know, and they'll do one-handed swings behind the neck. So it's inward, so it goes inward and across. So it's down to the hips and then back out again. And it's a sort of movement like this. And they'll do 20 on one side, 20 on the other, just to get their shoulders and their elbows going, you know, right up in the air like that. Right. And then they start with the lighter ones. The starting weights from memory, I think, are about 25 kilos per club. And then they're massive, these things. And I mean, they actually use a method, and it's a natural form of resin. And the Palavans glue that club handles to the hands so they don't slip out.
Oh wow!
It's incredibly humid there. Right. You know, so I mean, sweating is obviously an issue. So I think it's done for two reasons: A, so that the clubs don't slip out, and also that means that they can just swing for that little bit longer before their strength gives or the endurance gives out.
Right.
And I mean, and then they step up. So I mean, I couldn't actually sort of figure out whether it was a sort of 10 kilo jump or 5 kilos, but they're certainly sort of like a 25, 30, 35, 40, up to about 50 kilos is part of the competition. And then basically the next guy comes along and he ladder steps through all the weights again. Right. And it's the guy who can do the most reps. And it just for everybody's sake, 1 rep means that you swing left, that's half a rep, right, 1 rep. Right. So you have to use both hands, and it's the same for the Gada, same for the Jori. So yeah, that's a very interesting sort of spectacle to see. I mean, it literally, they'd made a sand mound in the middle of the street, or a little square sort of thing it was. All the cars were stopped. There was no access whatsoever. Everybody's gathered in this massive circle. And just for the record, there's been a lot of comments, and I've had a lot of comments. Some of them really very rude, and others not understanding. You know, why don't they wear gym clothes when they're doing all this training? I mean, people have to realize that in India, and particularly in Varanasi and in that area, the humidity is amazing, and it's boiling hot. And they wear this sort of, you know, like it looks like a pair of Speedos. I mean, it's basically it's tied around the waist and the hips and the Nagota, it's called. So, I mean, that basically is very much because of the climate more than anything else. Right. You know. Right. So it's just, and it looks like a pair of Speedos basically when it's on properly. Yeah. Yeah. So everybody in the competitions basically does that. They just wear that as as their clothing.
That's that goes back to like, cultural and also, location. Like I think a lot of things
Yeah,
come out of both cultural practices as well as what the climate is like, I mean, people wear less in
that's
climates that are
exactly,
hot. So it
that's
makes
right.
total sense
And I
to
mean,
me.
if you think it, that's right. And I mean, for wrestling matches, they throw they use a special dirt, which is basically they bring it in once a year. They put them into the wrestling areas. It's dug up every day and all this sort of thing. But they also, as a wrestling match starts and as it continues, they throw dirt onto the two opponents, throw
Hmm.
the dirt onto each other, and it's important to have it all over your body because their grip improves. I mean, obviously, your opponent's sweating like crazy,
Right,
and the earth on their skin absorbs the sweat, so consequently gripping the opponent is a lot easier.
right,
So it's just a sort of it's something that is just worth mentioning because I mean that means that the more exposed the body is, the better, because I mean
right.
they'll go for shoulder holds, leg holds, and all this sort of thing. So I mean it's all part and parcel of the what they're basically training for. But I will say, I was really surprised to find out that there are two sorts of akharas, certainly in Varanasi. One type of akhara is based and oriented on strength and on, for instance, the swinging the gada, the jori, and they also train with conventional weights like barbells and that type of thing. That's creeping
Hmm.
in kind of more and more these days, which is a pity in a way. But anyway, I mean, some of it's improvised, which is quite scary to see because there's nothing. I mean, forget safety. I mean, there's no such thing. So I mean, there's. I mean, I think in one of my videos, a lot of there was a they were lifting barbells up and they had no locks on the ends. So I mean, there was this sort of movement of the bells as the bar went up. So
Right,
forget all that stuff.
right.
And then there's the wrestling akharas where the wrestling is all the training in those happens for wrestlers. So they're very different camps.
Hmm.
You've got the strength section, and then you've got the wrestlers who they want to be supple as possible,
Right.
and the strength guys, they also want the suppleness. I mean, as I said before, they will only train with lighter gadas during the year, and then for the festival in August, they will go to the heavier stuff, and that's
Hmm.
basically they'll do about 3 to 4 weeks training prior to the event for the
Hmm.
Cobra Festival, and then basically that's it, finished. Everything's put away for the year.
Mm.
So now, I mean, you were asking me, so Iran also. So in Iran, things are very, very different. I mean, it's much more structured, the training, in the sense that they'll go through a sort of dynamic warm-ups. And I mean, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background here. The Zulkhaneh, as it's known, is basically a building that you walk into, and in Persia or modern day Iran, I mean, there were obviously invasions from the north, south, east, and west. I mean, basically, there's been constant conflict in there from one area or another.
Hmm.
And at one point, and I'm not quite sure when this was, all training with military equipment was banned.
Mm.
And the Zulkhaneh kind of came into its own in the sense that with the meals and all the members of the Zulkhaneh could actually train and do sort of like, war training for combat.
Hmm.
And it was done in secret. So, I mean, the Zulkhaneh are amazing. I mean, especially the older ones. The newer ones aren't so interesting. But everywhere I went, I tried to get into the older ones, which usually is a staircase that, hang on, it turns in a certain way so that if you're downstairs, you can come back, you can come up and fight. So, yeah, it turns to the right. So it's a spiral staircase.
Hmm.
And if you're fighting, if you've got an opponent coming down the stairs, you can fight with them going up the stairs.
Mm.
So, you know, this is considering that you're right-handed, basically. But I mean,
Right.
so the staircases are really narrow. I mean, they're basically just wider than your shoulders, really, really narrow. So one person at a time. Two people can't pass on one of these staircases. And you drop down into the basement, but basically there's no ceiling. So you look up, and you will look up into a dome. There's a hole at the very top where light comes in to light the place up, basically. So, I mean, that's the only source of light that there is.
Wow.
And there's a place for the morshed, or the drummer. The morshed is the one who conducts the exercises and beats the drum and basically recites poetry and prayers to a certain degree. And then each of the palavans, and they've got a pit which is either circular or octagonal, and that's about 40 centimeters or sort of 2 foot below the floor level. And everybody who goes into the pit has to ask permission from the drummer if he can enter, and then he touches the floor with his hand, touches his lips as a mark of respect. And I think that's a very interesting thing. We were talking about the customs and culture. The custom there is basically, no matter whether you're a millionaire or whatever, or just literally a farm worker, everybody, as they step into the pit, which is called the Goud, that's G-O-U-D, when they step into that, basically become equal. So there's no difference between the men, and I mean, basically there are, they exercise together and they're all equal. And they start with dynamic form of exercises. Then they'll go to the sheno or shena, which is the push-up board. And then the exercises are done with the push-up board, and they're done on a 4 count, which is fairly slow, so that they'll go down once to the ground with their shoulders, and they'll stretch their hips and go 3 times to the back. And then at the very end, they do what's called the 2 count, which is basically you drop down onto the push-up board once, and you push back once with your hips. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, and the other one is 1 down, 2, 3, 4 down. So that's a 4 count, 2 count. So the 2 count's obviously a lot harder and a lot more demanding. Then they'll go to the meals, and I mean the sheno and the meal sessions last anything from 10 to 20 minutes at a time for each one. So I mean, it's a fairly decent workout.
Yeah.
Most of the guys, and then they start off slow, and the drumming's amazing. I mean, and it's like, to give you an example, when you're there and taking part in it, it's as if everybody's spirit kind of comes into the center of the room. It's just amazing. And your individuality kind of goes, because everybody's swinging, and it's sort of like a very powerful type of environment. I mean, I've never known anything like it.
Right.
Amazing to be part of, and to just to observe, because I mean, you can go into them and observe them, or if you know how to do swing meals, they invite you to come in and join. So I mean, that was good. Then they do the cabaret, which is the steel bow which they swing from side to side over the shoulders. And that's the Persians were. That's originated from the fact that they were incredibly good at bowmanship and bows and arrows. And one of the feats that apparently they used to be able to do was to fire on horseback to the back. So they'd fire, and they didn't fire like the conventional, like you see in the Olympics, where they hold the bow with one hand, draw with the other. Yeah. They fired overhead like this with the bow, parallel with the ground, and pull the bow that way. And apparently their precision in that sort of thing, riding on horseback, was amazing. So it's good to know. I mean, and the cabaret basically comes from this. Very difficult to do. I mean, the second time I went to Iran, I just went to Shiraz in the south of Iran, to a Zurkhaneh academy there, just to basically brush up on things like the push-ups and the meal swinging and so on. And they showed me how to swing the cavalier, but I just found it very, I didn't have much time, unfortunately, but
Right.
my shoulders were so messed up after swinging clubs all day. And I'm not, this is sort of like 7 kilo per club, but if you do it for a few hours a day, you sure know about it. And also the push-ups, like sort of 200 push-ups in the
Yeah.
morning, and then just do some club work and more push-ups.
Right.
It was just massive. So when my time came to start doing that, towards the end of the week, it was just like, I'm done here. Can't do that one. Yes, it's just
well,
there's a bit of background about Iran and these Zurkhaneh.
that's this has been an amazing amount of information, and I'm sure there's tons more. I definitely should get on the phone with you in the future as well. But before we before we depart, I really want to have you just kind of share a little bit about your recent health challenges, as well as
Sure.
and the last question will be with the growing popularity of maces and gadas and things like that. What do you hope for its future as an implement?
Okay. There's a question here which I think is definitely worth answering. I'm just going to put my glasses. It's Joe Gallardo asking, to your knowledge, were women forbidden to take part in swinging the Gada and wrestling training? Very
That's a good
much
question.
so. Yeah, no, very much so. And the women are still there. I was contacted recently, just jumping back to Iran or Persia. I was contacted recently by a lady in Tehran who's wanting to, because women are forbidden to take part in Zurkhaneh there, even to this day. And there's a strong movement of women now trying to break that sort of like shell, to allow women to at least train, even if it's not on their own. They're not even talking about training with men, but doing it on their own. So now going back to India, the interesting thing is that there's an Indian goddess who holds a gada in one hand and a fly whisk in the other. And she's a very young woman, and basically now I'm struggling to remember here, and I think it's in Hindi. The word gada is actually a feminine root, or the root of the word is feminine. So consequently, and the goddess is presented as a young woman with holding a gada, and Gada Devi she's called, and she's an actual but she never swung the gada for exercise, just to answer that question. So, and women basically in all the akharas, just going back to that for a second, the akharas are usually in public spaces that are sponsored by a wealthy businessman or whatever, and the windows that overlook the akhara, women are not allowed to come up to the windows during training. So that means, they train from 7 till about 8:30 in the mornings, and it's forbidden for women to come to actually watch the training in an akhara, because an akhara is also a temple. So, you take your shoes off when you go into one, and you go barefoot, and it's a beaten earth surface. It's mostly all outside. It's not inside. I diversify here. If you go down south, an akhara is called a garadi, which is like a house of strength, and that's all indoors, because I think they have more rains and stuff there, but they still move earth in there. In the north, the feminine participation is just basically not acceptable, which is that answers that question. Anyway, so moving on, with my cancer diagnosis, God, that was a bloody shock and a half, that one when that happened.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say this for all the guys. Over the last 10 years, I have had like blood tests done, and something called a PSA blood test done, which is supposed to detect cancer. and or prostate cancer in particular, and it's sod's law that the strain that I've got wasn't picked up because it doesn't register on that test. So it was only when you know and if people want to know how my cancer was found, I started getting up in the night and peeing a lot, basically 8 or 9 times a night. It was just horrific. I mean, which was waking me up. I went to my doctor and he referred me to a specialist. The specialist said, "Oh, well, we can do something called a TERP, which is a transurethral something of the prostate. I forget the word." And so I went in, had the operation done, and automatically they do tests for prostate cancer. And I came back positive, and then I had to go back and get another test done, resample everything. And we found out that it spread into my pelvic area, into the nodes and so on. So I mean, basically, it's been discovered too late in a way. I mean, it's So now jumping through, 6 chemos later, and a CAT scan has revealed that the tumors have shrunk in size, which is good news. I'm going back for more blood tests in mid-February and possibly another CT scan. To establish basically what if any more treatments I'm going to have. Right. In the meantime, I have to have what's called a hormone therapy, and I think in some ways that's the worst, because basically the hormone therapy that I have reduces your naturally produced testosterone in your body. And I didn't realize how much of an impact that has on a man's energy levels, endurance, and all this sort of thing. And that's pretty full on. I get tired very easily, although I mean I still train. I mean, I trained this morning. I did about sort of 15 minutes of stretches and then 45 minutes of a mix of Indian clubs, meals, and Gada, which is great. But then I mean I'll get points during the day where I really do have to just rest up and have a bit of a rest, and then continue. So from a men's point of view, I've since found out that the incidence of prostate cancer in men is almost equal to, if not the same as, breast cancer in women. Wow. Hang on a second. I'm just going to plug in my phone here so we don't drop out. 2 secs. Here we go. Close. Okay, so I mean, basically the incidence is very common, but and now here I'll tell you a weird story. I mean, I sailed through the chemo in some ways because you're kind of thinking. I mean, I was training every day. Every day, I mean, I swung the Gada the most because I found that the best therapy wise, and it kind of took me to another place. I mean, the Indian clubs did the same, meals did the same, but I mean, the Gada was, and the training at first. The first 10 minutes or so were, like racked with pain, basically, and discomfort, and nausea, and all this sort of thing. But then it's just fantastic because the body kind of does I'm not dealing with this anymore. And I mean, your blood flow you can literally feel everything switching on. And then, I was just swinging for up to another 50 minutes with the mace alone. Just to get everything, and walking out of my gym room in my old house, feeling amazing, right? Which was fantastic. But then the weird thing is, there's always people talk about men not talking or maybe not going to see their doctors and stuff. Yeah. The chemo finished, and my wife and I both thought, oh, great, the chemo's finished, things will go pretty well back to normal. Nah, that just didn't happen. And I started sort of falling into a bloody black hole because of it, because the effect of that was, it's like you start realizing that this is something that you're going to have to deal with all the time, and it's not the chemo, it's the hormone therapy. So the tiredness, the exhaustion. You're walking up a flight of stairs and you have to stop like an old man. I'm going to be 68 next week, but I mean, for me, I could walk up a flight of stairs no problem at all, and only slightly breath. Now I have to stop to get my breath back. Right. So, you know, and the acceptance of this was just, you know, what, so I mean, I was starting to, you know, fall and go into depression, not talking about it. I stopped, you know, in a way, even posting on Facebook and stuff, because I just thought, well, you know, what can I say? What can I talk about? Sorry,
Right.
my little stand's just gone down. And then a good friend of mine in the UK just sent me a quick message saying, you know, hey, what's happening? You know, I haven't heard from you. I've not posted anything. And it kind of snapped me out, because I just thought, well, you've got the disease, but basically I still swing clubs, I still train, and I still do that, and I'm still going to be running the website. So get off your butt and, you know, and just get moving again. So I mean, literally in that short message, you know, what's happening, it snapped me out of it.
Right.
And I mean, basically, I'd say to that to any guy, you know, if you're sick and stuff, go to the doctor. That's for a kickoff. But also, I mean, you know, talk about it. You know, talk to people about it and so on, because I just think it's really important. Because at the end of the day, my oncologist said, you know, they can't cure prostate cancer. It goes with you till you die. But it can be managed.
Right.
And the management from my point of view is, I mean, like daily exercise, I mean, club swinging, gada swinging, the rest of it, and talking about it as much as I possibly can, and living life to the full as much as I can. And now I know that I'm going to have moments where I'm going to be completely knackered, tired, and I'm going to have to sit down and basically, you know, but then sit down or go for a cup of coffee or something like that, recover, and literally, it's about 10 minutes. That's all I need at the moment. I mean, that might get worse over time, but right now, so, you know, and as I say, I mean, I can still do an hour's training in the morning, including a warm-up, and, you know, come away feeling bloody brilliant. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's the way things are at the moment. I mean, hopefully that's not going to change for a while, but who knows at the moment.
Right. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that with all of us. I mean, I remember when you posted it, and I really appreciate that. I think, you know, the social media is missing a lot of authenticity these days, and
It
you know,
is.
I think it's very important that, you know, we see that people are human, and we understand that, hey, we're all human, we all bleed, we all hurt, we all feel. And, you know, if we can enter into conversations with that in mind, I think we at least kind of start on a level playing field with each other for conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've come up
So
on an hour. It's been
okay. There was
it's
one
been
last question you were telling me that you wanted
yeah,
to ask me.
yeah, it was you know, with the growing popularity of maces and clubs, what do you hope
Sorry.
for the future of these implements? What are your wishes for it moving forward?
One thing that I'm going to say straight away is that I consider there are definite signs that I'm seeing right now that people are, especially regarding the mace, and it's nobody's fault. I don't think there's anybody's to blame here, but they're forgetting the origins of it. And there's a lot of sort of exercises being done with the mace, which I don't consider mace work. In the sense where, you know, you give me somebody who can swing a mace for half an hour, let's say a half marathon or a marathon for an hour, and that to me is mace work in its full capacity. So I mean, you're working on grip, your core, and everything else. Some of the flashier stuff that's being done these days, I mean, I have a real split sort of thing about it, because to me it reminds me of sort of, you know, like a band leader leading, you know, practicing for, you know, leading a marching band, some of the stuff that's being done, especially with the turning, grabbing the mace by the very close to the head. It's kind of, well, what's the point? I mean, is that, I mean, okay, it's nice because there's a flow going, but you haven't got that sort of like, you know, the effort of pulling it down, getting it down to your hip, and so on. So that's what I'm going to say about, I mean, I just think that, you know, do that fancy stuff by all means, but also swing the mace properly. You know, go up in those steps. So, you know, do the sort of like the 8 kilo, the 10, the 12, and the 15. Maybe go to sort of like a 20. I mean, that's the sort of thing you need to sort of remember the roots of it. Now, the same thing goes for Indian clubs where the circles that I was talking to you about earlier on, it's those basic movements that, you know, you have to always go back to the basics, always you know, repeat the stuff that creates the movements, because then you can link them together and choreograph them in any way you like, for sure. So where do I see it going? I think that there will be a greater acceptance of it as time goes on, because people are seeing benefits for their shoulders in particular. You know, it's that for that older person reaching up. You know, if they were using some form of exercise that's circular in the sense that the arm was going over and up, that would, pardon me, that would free up a sort of the shoulder muscles, maybe the back circle with a little bit of this. I mean, even this sort of exercise. I mean, I sometimes, just to give you an example, in my training, I get people to literally to stand with their thumbs here, elbows forward, and then, elbows forward this way and out. And people struggle just with that movement. No clubs.
Yeah.
You know, so and because it's the hands are overhead, and in Indian clubs there's a lot of overhead work, which recently I've found even that can be extended. So that means that when I first, like everybody else, basically swung a club out over the shoulder and threw it out kind of at a 45-degree angle. But really, I mean, if you try, you can actually go up at about 60 degrees.
Yeah.
Much more challenging.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, there's sort of improvements that that can be done there. And and I think it's going to be Indian clubs in particular will be used a hell of a lot for shoulder repair, basically, because I mean it just moves everything in the shoulders. There's just no question about it. And as I said earlier on, I went down the. Actually, I didn't say this. Pardon me. I said for snakes a 1 pound, 1.5 pound club. For general Indian club practice, a 2 pound, 2.5 pound club is more than enough. You know, if you, for instance, swing for about, say, 20 minutes, I mean that's a, you know, you're moving a lot of weight in that time.
Right.
So basically, you don't need anything sort of like that's very much heavier than that.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I think that's the sort of thing that will be used by people who need shoulders fixing and so on. But it's also, as far as kids go, fantastic. And I did a class in Hawaii 2015, and I had a group of kids, and we just had basically a wooden dowel with a tennis ball on the end of it, so nothing heavy. And those kids just bloody loved it. It was just fantastic to see them do it. And again, it was just the basic movements. So, you know, from a perspective of, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Average swinging clubs, swing the mace and so on, they need to learn the basic stuff. You know, none of this sort of fancy work at all, because it's kind of detracting from it. So swing, get your elbows up, get your hands down, and all this sort of thing with the mace. But that rule applies to meals. It applies to Indian clubs. It can be practiced in all three disciplines. You know, getting that hand really down deep there. Everything's, you know, that stretch that, you know, you see many times people doing this type of thing, and this type of stretch across the shoulders. The Indian club basically does all that, and you're gripping. So your forearms working because you grip holding the club in position on the pommel. There's one danger that I'm gonna say straight away. There's a number of people at the moment who are swinging Indian clubs on YouTube and on Facebook, and doing what I call they're swinging just by the pommel alone. I mean, which looks amazing, and it's very, very flash and everything else, and you can do some very quick and nice moves with it. And it's called, in the old days, in the 1930s, it was called knob swinging, and it was really frowned upon even then. It means that you're not changing grip, and one of the beauties of Indian clubs is that your forearms are constantly working, changing from like the hammer grip, like holding like this, to the saber grip, to the claw grip, which is basically the clubs hanging down from here. And then there's a snake grip, which is something, which is much more advanced. Fantastic, everything in your forearms working then, including your shoulders, because you're swinging all the time, so you're changing grips as you're going through the circles. So very valuable. Yeah. So yeah.
Wow. Well, that was a lot of great information, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from this conversation if they can make it through. I know the attention span of most people is about 15 seconds, thanks to Instagram. But I'm going to put this in a lot of different places. So, the people who are encouraged and switched on enough to want to know and want to hear everything you have to say will listen. And the rest, unfortunately, they'll just miss out, and that's unfortunate for them. But sure. I want to thank you so much for the time, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on here and use Facebook in this manner. I've never had the opportunity to meet you, and it's just amazing for me to go from having seen you on YouTube years ago and having no means or ways of even really engaging or interacting to coming to today and having the opportunity to sit down and have a real chat face to face on a phone.
It's amazing technology.
It is amazing, and I wish you all the best with your health, and thank you for sharing that information, and for others out there. And I'm going to make sure that I post all the suitable links so that everybody can find Indian clubs if they don't already know you already. And once again, thank you so much for your time.
No, it's great to meet you face to face, even though it's via a phone. But if I get sort of like good results this year from my oncologist, hopefully I'll try and get over to the States, because last year was such a disappointment. I mean, I had, the trip was massively planned. And then literally everything just crumbled. It was just so sad. I was actually eyeing both one of your stops here in the Bay Area, the Sacramento, or I think it was down south, Fremont or something like that as well. That's right. Yeah.
I was eyeing those, and then I got the message that you wouldn't be coming, and it was
I know. It was so sad. It was just one of those things. Life goes on. So hopefully I will make it over sometime in the near future, just depending on, what happens. I mean, if things go well, then I'll be back.
Well,
I'll be back, as they say.
Fingers crossed, and we're all praying for you out here.
Okay.
And hopefully I can make it down that way sometime. Thank you so much once again, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye for now.
All right, bye.